The hours before dawn on August 1st, 2025, were supposed to be routine for 18-year-old Giovanni, a teen from North Carolina who had been spending time in Florida visiting family. He had plans later that day. He was supposed to see his grandfather in Brevard County. He was supposed to come home soon. He was supposed to text his mother about what he wanted for dinner that night. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. But instead, in the early morning darkness, he sent her something else. "Mom, help." A text message that arrived at nearly 1:50 a.m. A message that would become the last trace of him alive. And a message that no mother could ever forget. According to investigators, Giovanni's cousins and two of their friends arrived to pick him up around 1 to 2 a.m. in Englewood, Florida. The plan was simple: drive him several hours northeast so he could stay with his grandfather. It wasn't a party. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't supposed to be anything unusual, but something shifted inside that car. Witnesses later told deputies that Giovanni began acting erratically, though the sheriff's office has never elaborated on exactly what that meant. Only that the change was sudden, alarming, and unexpected. The vehicle didn't crash. There was no altercation, but something made Giovanni desperate enough to want out of the car. And then he did. Traffic cameras positioned near I-75 and State Road 70 captured the most haunting part of this story. Giovanni running down an embankment, alone, toward a retention pond. Not chased. Not followed. Not pursued by anyone in sight. Deputies later emphasized this detail, that no one appeared to be after him, and he wasn't being threatened by anyone visible on camera. But the video did not answer the bigger question. Why was he running at all? Was he scared? Confused? In distress from something internal, emotional, or physical? Or was he simply trying to get somewhere he believed was safe? For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. All investigators could confirm was that after he ran toward the retention pond, Giovanni vanished into the darkness and did not return. His cousins told authorities they tried to find him. They called out. They searched the roadside. They drove around hoping to spot him. But by then, he was gone. Later that morning, authorities located two crucial pieces of evidence near the area where he had run. His phone, his backpack, both left behind on the roadside. Nothing was smashed. Nothing was torn. Nothing suggested a violent struggle. But what these items revealed was chilling in another way. Giovanni had run with nothing, leaving behind the tools he would have needed to call for help, navigate, or survive in an unfamiliar environment in the dead of night. His mother, still holding on to the last text he ever sent, began calling, messaging, and begging for updates as hours turned into a terrifying unknown. As the sun rose on August 1st, deputies began canvassing the area around the retention pond. Divers were called. Patrol units searched the nearby woods. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning for signs of movement or discarded clothing. But the terrain around I-75 is unforgiving. Marshland mixed with thick brush, deep water, and Florida wildlife that becomes most active at night. Days passed with no sign of Giovanni. His mother and family arrived on scene, begging for resources, pleading for urgency. They did interviews, shared photos, and pushed authorities for more assistance. Some family members voiced concerns publicly, saying they believed the local sheriff's office wasn't treating the case with the seriousness it deserved. They wanted the FBI involved. They wanted search dogs brought in sooner. They wanted every possible resource deployed immediately. But despite efforts from the county and from volunteers, the pond remained still, silent, and devoid of answers until it wasn't. August 8th, 1 week after Giovanni disappeared, a body was found in the retention pond. He had been underwater long enough that decomposition made visual identification impossible. The mud, the moisture, the heat, all of it accelerated the process. It would take dental records to confirm it was him. When deputies notified the family, hope evaporated instantly. The fight to find him became a battle to understand what happened to him, and whether anyone could have stopped it. But as the autopsy began, investigators learned something that complicated the tragedy even further. The District 12 Medical Examiner's Office released its findings. Cause of death, drowning. Manner of death, accidental. There were no stab wounds, no gunshot injuries, no blunt force trauma, nothing indicating that another person physically harmed him. But there was something else, something no one expected. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The Me discovered a rare congenital coronary artery abnormality in Giovanni's heart, a condition that has been linked to sudden cardiac events, especially during periods of stress, panic, or intense physical exertion. Investigators believed this heart condition may have contributed to what happened that night. Maybe it triggered panic. Maybe it caused chest pain. Maybe it made him feel like something was deeply, physically wrong, leading to erratic behavior and a desperate attempt to escape the car. But the medical examiner still concluded that the immediate cause of death was drowning. Another disturbing detail: after he drowned, his body showed post-mortem marks consistent with alligator scavenging, something tragically common in Florida retention ponds. None of that changed the official ruling. No signs of homicide. No signs he was chased. No signs he was restrained or fought back against anyone. To investigators, it looked like a tragic accident. But to Giovanni's family, that wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Even with the autopsy results, his family publicly expressed doubts about the investigation. They questioned the timeline, the response, and what they viewed as a lack of urgency in those early hours. They announced their intention to seek an independent autopsy, determined to ensure nothing was overlooked, because for them, none of this added up. How could an 18-year-old boy, smart, funny, loved, grounded, suddenly spiral into confusion so quickly that he ran into the night alone? Why did he text "Mom, help" minutes before disappearing? Why didn't anyone see him again until it was too late? The sheriff's office stood by its findings. The family stood by their doubts. And the public, watching the case unfold, was left suspended between both stories, the official version and the version that might exist beneath it. As the family prepares to challenge the official findings with their own independent autopsy, one critical question remains unanswered. What exactly happened in the moments before Giovanni ran from that car? And could those missing minutes completely change the story of how he died? The morning after Giovanni's body was found, the quiet retention pond off I-75 stopped being just another Florida landscape. It became a crime scene to some, an accident site to others, and a symbol of unanswered questions to anyone who had followed the case from the start. For investigators, the discovery of Giovanni's body allowed them to move the case from search mode to analysis mode. For the family, it marked the beginning of a deeper fight, one that had nothing to do with terrain or wildlife or long nights of searching. Now the battle was about truth, accountability, and whether the story presented by law enforcement truly reflected what happened to the boy they loved. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The official investigation was underway. But with each new update from authorities came more frustration, more doubt, and more suspicion. The Manatee County Sheriff's Office began its reconstruction with the evidence they had: traffic camera footage, witness statements, digital timestamps, and Giovanni's last known movements. The traffic cameras provided a critical piece of the puzzle: Giovanni running alone toward the retention pond. Deputies emphasized this repeatedly in press briefings. There was no one behind him. No one appears to have been chasing him. We have no evidence of another person in pursuit. This was not a theory, it was what the footage showed. But the video did not show what happened before Giovanni appeared in frame. It did not capture the inside of the vehicle. It did not record the conversation or the behavior that caused him to bolt. All anyone had were the statements of those in the car and the text message he sent minutes earlier: "Mom, help." Investigators did not suggest foul play. They did not hint at a physical confrontation. They maintained their stance. Giovanni's behavior seemed to shift suddenly and dramatically, leading him to flee. Still, something about the timeline felt incomplete. The family could feel it, and they weren't alone. As news began to spread, the public took sides, not based on emotion alone, but on the uncomfortable gaps that seemed to linger in the official explanation. Why did an 18-year-old suddenly act erratically? Why did he abandon his phone and backpack? Why did no one in the car call 911 the moment he ran into the dark? Questions echoed across social media, news comment sections, and community groups. The possibility of a medical episode existed, but it didn't fully explain the panic. The possibility of fear existed, but fear of what? Reporters pushed the sheriff's office for additional details. Deputies stuck closely to confirmed facts, refusing to speculate. Their stance was clinical, procedural, rooted in what could be proven. But families do not grieve in bullet points. They grieve in memories, inconsistencies, and the heavy weight of what-ifs. And Giovanni's family felt the authorities were missing something or ignoring it. A week passed after the body's discovery before the sheriff's office released a definitive statement. The investigation does not indicate foul play. To Giovanni's mother, that conclusion arrived too quickly, too quietly, and without enough explanation. She believed the investigation lacked urgency from the very beginning, from the initial response to the search efforts to the communication with the family. On camera, she maintained her composure, but the pain was impossible to hide. This was her son. This was her final message from him. And she was not prepared to accept the idea that everything was simply an accident. The family publicly requested that the FBI become involved. They questioned the data, the timeline, the early hours after Giovanni disappeared. They highlighted moments where they felt deputies should have done more, especially when it came to searching the water sooner. They didn't accuse anyone by name. They didn't claim a conspiracy. They simply refused to accept what they felt was an incomplete story. This growing divide between law enforcement and the family added tension to the investigation. Every press release from the sheriff's office was examined. Every statement from the family gained attention. And with each passing day, the public pressure intensified. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Weeks later, when the autopsy report was shared with the family, it raised even more questions. The findings were medically sound, but emotionally devastating. Giovanni drowned. There were no signs of trauma inflicted by another person. His body showed post-mortem scavenging from alligators, a detail that crushed the family but did not change the cause of death. Toxicology showed trace ethanol, attributed to decomposition, not drinking. And then the most surprising discovery, a congenital coronary artery abnormality. This heart condition was extremely rare enough to go undetected for years, rare enough that many never know they have it until it causes an event. The medical examiner explained that under stress, mental or physical, the condition could trigger sudden cardiac symptoms, confusion, or panic. It could explain the erratic behavior witnessed in the car, could explain the urge to escape, could explain why Giovanni ran. But it didn't explain everything. Not to the family, not to the experts following the case, and not to anyone who believed the public deserved a clearer picture. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental. The sheriff's office closed their investigation into foul play, but the family's investigation was just beginning. Even without direct accusations, the presence of Giovanni's cousins and two others in the car drew scrutiny. The sheriff's office confirmed speaking with them, collecting statements, and reviewing their timeline. No signs of conflict, argument, or assault were reported. But to outsiders, there was one glaring issue. The car left the scene without Giovanni. To the family, this was the biggest red flag. Why didn't they call police immediately? Why didn't they stay until help arrived? Why did it take time before a full search was launched? Deputies said the witnesses cooperated. The family said cooperation doesn't answer the questions that matter. This divide became one of the core tensions in the case. Not a fight over facts, but over interpretation. Over decisions made in panic. Over whether normal behavior assessments by investigators matched the emotional weight carried by the family. Determined not to let Giovanni's death be closed with more questions than answers, the family announced they were planning an independent autopsy. Their goal wasn't to challenge the science. It was to challenge the sufficiency of the investigation. They wanted a second medical opinion. They wanted an expert who was not tied to the county. They wanted someone who would examine every physical detail without bias or local influence. Independent autopsies are not uncommon in cases where families feel unheard. But in this case, the announcement reignited public debate. If the official autopsy was correct, the independent results would confirm it. If something had been missed, it could change everything. Reporters asked the sheriff's office for comment. Deputies said the family was free to pursue any path they chose. But the family wasn't looking for permission. They were looking for answers. As Giovanni's story spread, community members organized discussions, awareness posts, and online threads analyzing details the sheriff's office had chosen not to emphasize. People questioned the behavior in the car. They questioned the initial search. They questioned why certain investigative tools weren't used sooner. And even though deputies stood firm, maintaining there was no evidence of foul play, the loudest concern wasn't about homicide. It was about whether the investigation had been thorough enough. In the world of true crime, unanswered questions are oxygen. And Giovanni's case had plenty of them. As the independent autopsy approaches, one critical possibility hangs in the air. Could a second examination reveal something the first one missed? A detail that rewrites the final hours of Giovanni's life and exposes a mistake in the official investigation? For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The weeks following Giovanni's official autopsy were marked by silence. The kind of silence that comes after the chaos of a missing person search ends but before the world decides what to believe. Law enforcement said their conclusions were final. The public waited for the family's response. And Giovanni's mother, carrying the weight of the last message her son ever sent, refused to let the story close. She wanted a second autopsy, a second set of eyes, a second chance at truth. What she didn't know yet was that her decision would ignite a chain reaction. One that would expose weaknesses in the investigation, intensify public pressure, and force both sides into a collision of facts, emotions, and unanswered questions. After the sheriff's office publicly stated that foul play was not suspected, the family moved quickly. They contacted independent forensic pathologists, specialists who handled cases where families believed key details may have been overlooked. These weren't people who worked on routine autopsies. They worked on the complicated ones, the ones where cause and manner of death required more than a simple explanation. The family didn't set out to disprove the official findings. They set out to confirm whether those findings were complete. But when they received the original autopsy report in full, certain details instantly caught their attention. The congenital coronary abnormality, a condition so rare that many never know they have it. The absence of external trauma, which supported the conclusion that no one harmed him physically. The drowning, the official cause of death. The accidental classification, a conclusion the family felt was premature. To the sheriff's office, these details formed a closed loop. To the family, they formed a gap, a space where something still didn't add up. What they wanted most was clarity about Giovanni's state of mind before he ran from the car. They believed understanding that moment was key to understanding what happened after. Was Giovanni panicking because of physical distress from his heart condition? Was he afraid of something in the car? Did he feel unsafe? Did he feel confused? Or was something else happening that investigators had never considered? Those questions formed the backbone of the independent inquiry. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The pathologist the family consulted was known for detailed examinations, the kind that required hours of studying images, tissue reports, water retention patterns, and microscopic analysis. Independent autopsies don't always require a new physical examination of the body. Sometimes, reviewing the original slides, photographs, and reports is enough to provide a professional second opinion. And that's what the family wanted: verification and transparency. By late August, the pathologist had enough documentation to begin their review. They didn't speak publicly. They didn't speculate. They worked meticulously, breaking down every detail of the report from the District 12 medical examiner's office. As they worked, the family continued digging into the timeline themselves, not to contradict investigators, but to fill in emotional and contextual gaps the sheriff's office did not consider relevant. And the more they learned, the more complex the story became. An independent timeline emerged, not disputing the sheriff's office, but adding layers the initial investigation never addressed. 1. the sudden shift in behavior. Everyone agreed on one thing. Giovanni began acting strangely in the vehicle, but no professional assessment existed to explain why. Was it panic? A cardiac symptom? Disorientation triggered by the congenital heart defect? An emotional crisis? No one knew. 2. The decision to run. Giovanni ran toward the embankment, alone, according to traffic cameras. Deputies said this supported the idea of a panic episode, possibly induced by physical or mental distress. But to the family, this moment didn't erase the need to understand what triggered it. 3. The abandoned belongings. Giovanni left both his phone and backpack behind. Items no teenager willingly abandons in the early morning hours, miles from safety. To the sheriff's office, this suggested a sudden and overwhelming urge to flee. To the family, it suggested something frightened or disoriented him enough to act without logic. 4. The text to his mother. "Mom, help." The timestamp, close to the time he disappeared, became the emotional and investigative anchor for the family's concerns. Investigators did not interpret it as evidence of foul play, but the family could not dismiss it, especially because it was so short, so urgent, and so out of place. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. By this point, the public had grown divided. Some believed the case was a tragic accident. Others believed questions still lingered. Community discussions intensified around the sudden nature of Giovanni's behavior, the heart condition that may have gone unnoticed for years, whether deputies searched the pond as quickly as they should have, whether the medical examiner ruled the case accidental too soon, and whether the independent autopsy would reveal anything new. News outlets continued to follow the story, aware that independent autopsy findings sometimes contradict or completely overturn official reports, and everyone waited. As the independent pathologist worked through the autopsy documents, the family reviewed statements from the people who were with Giovanni in the car that night. There were no allegations of violence, no claims of an argument, no reports of physical conflict. But to the family, those statements still left holes. Why didn't anyone call 911 the moment he ran off? Why didn't someone go into the woods after him? Why wasn't his mother notified immediately? Why wasn't the area secured sooner? The sheriff's office maintained that the individuals in the car cooperated fully and that their accounts aligned with the video evidence. But cooperation didn't erase the questions, and questions didn't erase the pain. By the third week of analysis, early observations, though not final, began forming a picture. The independent pathologist acknowledged the accuracy of several findings. The drowning was consistent with environmental conditions. There were no signs of homicidal violence. The congenital heart defect was real, and it was significant. The scavenging from wildlife occurred after death. But the pathologist also noted something important. The heart condition could have contributed to disorientation or sudden panic before Giovanni entered the water. This wasn't a contradiction. It wasn't a new cause of death, but it was a deeper explanation, one that acknowledged a factor the family felt had been glossed over by the official ruling. Still, the independent review wasn't finished. More analysis was underway, and the family hoped that when it was complete, they would finally understand the full truth of what happened to Giovanni before he ran into the night. Rumors about the independent autopsy reached the sheriff's office. Reporters began asking whether new findings would affect the official ruling. Deputies stood firm. Their stance remained unchanged. No foul play, accidental drowning. Case closed unless new evidence emerged. But now the possibility of new evidence was suddenly real. The sheriff's office declined further comment while the independent review continued. Behind the scenes, they prepared for the possibility of having to defend their investigation publicly if the second autopsy contradicted anything. And the tension between both sides, quiet but undeniable, continued to grow. As the independent forensic pathologist prepared their final conclusions, one pressing question loomed. Would their report match the official autopsy, or expose a critical detail that could reopen the entire investigation into Giovanni's death? For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The week after Giovanni's body was pulled from the retention pond, Manatee County seemed to move on. Traffic flowed normally past the I-75 interchange. The heat thickened, the news cycle shifted, and the buzz surrounding the search faded. But inside Giovanni's family home in North Carolina, nothing settled. The stillness felt unnatural, like the world had resumed while they were frozen at the moment their son vanished. For Giovanni's mother, the silence was the hardest part. For 8 days she had lived in a fever of activity, calling deputies, refreshing maps, rereading his final message, hoping for a miracle. Then suddenly, nothing. No updates, no new calls, just still air in a room where her son's laughter had lived. At the same time, detectives in Florida were signing off on their final documents. The medical examiner's report was now complete, and the sheriff's office had already released its conclusion: accidental drowning. They cited the lack of trauma, the absence of chase footage, the evidence of erratic behavior, and the congenital heart issue that could have put Giovanni at risk during intense physical exertion. But the family, especially his mother, wasn't convinced. They weren't rejecting the science. They simply believed there was more to the story than the paperwork suggested. And so began the next phase of this case: the fight for clarity. The first wave of public attention came from community petitions demanding a deeper review. The sentiment was simple: an 18-year-old doesn't just run into a swampy retention pond in the dark without something pushing him, internally or externally. People familiar with the area emphasized how treacherous that location was. Overgrown brush, murky water, alligators, ditches that drop off without warning. To them, the official version of events seemed incomplete. But to investigators, the picture looked straightforward. Giovanni ran alone. The footage didn't show a pursuer. There were no signs of restraint, assault, or obvious foul play. So why the disconnect? Because the investigation had a vacuum of context. No explanation for his fear. No deeper probe into his final interactions. No clear timeline of what happened inside the vehicle before he suddenly bolted into the night. And that vacuum left room for suspicion, not conspiracies, but reasonable questions any parent would ask. At press conferences, the sheriff's office reiterated the same stance. There is no evidence of a crime. But Giovanni's mother had a different perspective. There is also no evidence that all possibilities were explored. When the District 12 medical examiner classified Giovanni's death as an accidental drowning, they included several details that added complexity to the case. And no significant external trauma. No gunshot wounds, no stab wounds, no broken bones. Rare congenital coronary artery abnormality, a condition linked to sudden cardiac episodes during extreme stress or panic. A minor ethanol levels in the liver, but consistent with decomposition, meaning it didn't prove alcohol use. Alligator scavenging, post-mortem markings, further complicating visual assessments of injuries. Individually, none of these findings answered why Giovanni ran, barefoot and frantic, into the darkness. But together, they created a scenario that medical examiners considered medically plausible. A sudden cardiac event, triggered by fear or exertion, leading to disorientation, followed by drowning. To officials, it made sense. To his mother, it didn't erase the glaring unknowns. And so she announced her next step: an independent autopsy. The decision wasn't fueled by anger. It was fueled by duty. The unspoken responsibility every parent carries to leave no stone unturned when their child's life ends in unexplained chaos. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. In the wake of the autopsy, the sheriff's office released still images from the highway cameras that had captured Giovanni running. They showed him alone, sprinting downhill toward the retention pond. There were no shadows behind him, no figures in pursuit, no headlights closing in. To the department, the images were proof. To the family, they were only fragments, because the footage didn't show what happened in the car. It didn't explain his last text. It didn't answer what triggered his sudden terror. And so the public conversation became divided into two camps. One camp said, "There's no evidence of foul play." The other camp said, "There's also no full explanation." Both statements were true, which is what made the case so haunting. We explored what happened inside the car during Giovanni's final ride. According to official statements and confirmed reports, he began acting erratically. He became panicked and paranoid. He begged to get out of the car. Those details remained at the center of the family's uncertainty. They weren't accusing anyone. They simply believed investigators didn't scrutinize those moments enough. Why wasn't the car searched more thoroughly? Why weren't interviews longer or deeper? Why was the case closed so quickly after the body was found? Authorities maintained that all necessary procedures were followed. But to a mother, necessary wasn't the same as enough. As frustration built, Giovanni's family made a formal public plea. They wanted the FBI to take over the case. The request wasn't based on a theory of foul play. It was based on their belief that the investigation lacked urgency, depth, and transparency. The FBI never formally confirmed involvement, but the family used the moment to amplify their call for answers. News outlets across the country picked up the story, from People.com to ABC affiliates to regional newspapers. The case was no longer local. It was a national conversation about what happens when an unexplained death is closed too quickly, even when there's no clear evidence of a crime. As days turned into weeks, Giovanni's family began memorializing him publicly. Photos surfaced online, bright, smiling, full-faced pictures of an 18-year-old who still had years of dreams ahead of him. Friends described him as gentle. Relatives described him as thoughtful. Teachers described him as resilient. His mother described him as her sunrise and sunset. Slowly, the grief began to transform into a mission. She vowed that her son's story would not be forgotten, not minimized, not reduced to a single line in a police report. She wanted his final moments understood, not guessed. Every interview she gave carried the same message: I owe him the truth. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Months after Giovanni's death, with the official ruling unchanged, the story reached a point where the facts were clear, but the truth felt incomplete. The case did not have the suspect, a crime, a evidence of violence, a chase, a cover-up confirmed by any source, a contradicting autopsy report. Everything pointed toward a tragedy, a sudden medical episode, panic, and a fatal plunge into dark water. Yet one question remained suspended in the air, untouched by science or investigation. What terrified Giovanni enough to make him run? It is the one question no report could answer, and it is the question that forms the haunting legacy of this case. You can close a file, you can close a cause of death, but you can't close a mother's need to understand what happened to her child. Giovanni's case is officially resolved, but for his family, and for everyone who followed his disappearance, it will never be truly closed. Some stories end with justice, some end with proof, some end with accountability. This one ends with uncertainty, and the hope that one day, the missing pieces will find their way into the light. You've been watching True Crime Story Vault, where every story is told with facts, empathy, and respect for those who can no longer speak for themselves. Don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories like this. Until next time, remember, the truth is never buried.